friends, and welcome to the third episode of the Sgraffito mug series. In today's class, I'm going to be showing you different options for your handle for this mug. And keep in mind that you do have to incorporate a three-dimensional detail of some type onto your mug, which means that it can't just be what you create using the clay extruder. So I want to show you some different possibilities, the first being the most traditional style that you'd see, which is a question mark shape. So it touches on the front side and then arches all the way over so that it's connecting on the back side. So this is one option, and a great thing that you could consider for this is adding a three-dimensional detail where this meets the mug up at the top, which is what I end up doing later in this episode. Another example would be to create just an arch that connects back to something that's along the seam for where you add your handle to. So you could add something three-dimensional to this as well. Another style to consider is a loop-de-doo. So you could swirl this around so that it's arching over. And the last style that I'll show you is just a little swirl, so it's kind of arching all the way around. So you could still use the clay extruder to make your handle for this, but you do have to add something three-dimensional to it. Another option would be to create your handle so that it looks like something three-dimensional. So say you were taking a moon. That was one of my brainstorm ideas for my handle, and I was going to make like the moon face that was like a little arch with a crescent with a nose and the mouth, and I could make that three-dimensionally as long as I hollowed it out. Something else to consider when you're making something that needs to be washed very frequently is that you don't want to hollow something out and then have a space for an air hole, because when you wash that, you'll have liquid that will start to collect in that space, and it's really hard to shake it out of just a small air hole. So when you're creating your handle, if you do choose to make the handle itself the three-dimensional detail, then I recommend just carving out from underneath so that it's still hollow and it looks three-dimensional from the sides and the top, but underneath you're just able to wash that space out rather than trying to have to shake it out of a tiny air hole. So those are some things to consider, but I'll show you how I created my three-dimensional handle and walk you through those steps very thoroughly, just so that you have an idea of how I created mine, and maybe it will inspire some details for how you'll create yours. So let's get started. We're going to be working with the clay extruder to make your handles. So you're going to find this bin that's directly next to the clay extruder and find some very important things. You need the 3 pins that go into it. You need the base that mounts onto the bottom. You need the handle choice wheel, and then you need the blocker so that you choose only one of these handle designs. So for my design for my handle, I'm trying to make it tie in with the design that I'm doing for my Sgraffito. So I'm going to do an alien that's like on a little like track, like it's got like a little rainbow coming out of the back of my spaceship handle. So I'm going to choose one that's a little bit flatter and kind of bumpy. So I'm going to use this one so that I can have the alien's spaceship going on the top of that handle and have it look like that's like trailing behind the spaceship. And I'm choosing one that's a little bit flatter so that my spaceship will rest easily on top of it. So now that I know which one I'm going to choose, I'm going to line it up so that that is the only one that the clay can go through. And I want to make sure that it's lined up so that my bar isn't blocking any of it. Now I'm going to be very careful and place this just into the base. Make sure that it's still lined up correctly. And now I'm going to line this up with the 3 pinholes, and sometimes there's clay that's like in those holes, so I like to just kind of poke my finger through first just to make this step a little bit easier for myself. Now I'm going to line those sections up. I'm going to place the pins. We want to make sure they go all the way through. Sometimes it seems like they're all the way in and it's still just barely holding. So now that they're all the way in, I'm going to take my piece of clay and I'm going to very carefully set it in. Sometimes students hold it from the top, and this is sort of an old clay extruder, so you can see it's starting to get a little loose. So it's important not to just like plunk, drop it from the top. We want to just very carefully reach in and set it down. Another reason why you want to set it down rather than dropping it is because it may shift your handle option on the inside when you drop it. So we're just carefully setting it. Now in the corner is this lever, and you want to just make sure that it doesn't have any dry clay on the bottom, and so I'm just setting it on this canvas wedging counter right here so that I can make sure I throw it away at the end instead of just making a mess on the floor. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to just very carefully set it all the way down until it touches my clay. So typically we start on this bottom notch until we just feel the clay kind of squish all the way down. And then once it's sort of like stuck there and sort of firm, like you can't really press much farther, we're going to press with quite a bit of weight, and we're just going to kind of pull that down, and you'll start to see your handle coming out on the bottom until you have a good length for your handle that's not like got any little marks or anything on it. I'm just going to swipe that off the bottom, lay that carefully on the counter so you can see it makes this really beautiful design. I'm going to lay it so that it's not on any old dry crumbs. Sometimes it's kind of hard to get out, so I can even use this little notch to help me lift it. And then I'm going to lift that all the way up, clean off the clay off the bottom of this little lever before I put it back in the corner. Now I'm going to pull the pins out, pull this base off, and then I'm just going to push my clay through. So I need to separate this clay myself so that I'm not leaving a mess for the next person. So I'm gonna just grab this excess, kind of set it next to all of the pieces that went through the gap, and then I'm just gonna remove the bigger chunks and make sure I don't have any left on this section here, and then I'll just put all of these pieces, the base, the pins, the handle, wheel choice, and the 3 pins back into that bin before I leave. As I'm working on adding my handle, it's really important that I wrap my mug up while I'm working so that it's not sitting here and drying out. So I'm going to take my bag and I'm going to put my hand all the way inside, kind of ball it up in my fist. I'm going to very carefully just drop that remaining portion of the bag into my mug and then pull it around the outside edges. Just lift that up and wrap it around so that it's not drying out as I'm creating my handle. Now, it's nice to use those clear bags so then you can still sort of size things out as you're working. And I am going to create a handle where the majority of my design is going to be the alien that's at the top corner of my mug where my handle meets it. So I'm just going to leave most of this handle fairly plain except for where I add the alien. So I'm gonna consider the shape that I'd like to make, and there are quite a few options, but I'm going to make what's called the question mark shape for my handle. So it's just a shape that's sort of similar to this. So I'm actually going to set it sideways so that it can start to harden in that shape, because right now this clay is really plastic. It's very bendable. So if I were to try to attach this while it was this wet, it would most likely not hold the shape that I'm trying to get it to stay in. So I'm actually going to let this start to dry out a little bit in that curved shape while I start to work on the detail that I'm adding to it. So right now I'm starting to work on creating the 3-dimensional part of my handle, which all of your handles for your Sgraffito project have to have something 3-dimensional going on. So whether you turn your handle into like an actual shape of something that is tied into your design, or whether you're adding something interesting as a thumb rest for your handle, I'm adding a spaceship with a little alien on it. So that's my plan for this project. So when you're working on adding your 3-dimensional piece, you should have your actual mug wrapped up, you should have your handle drying, and we're working with plastic clay. I'm also gonna just make sure that I've dusted away these crumbs from when I was working on my mug so that I don't continuously add little crumbs to my project as I'm working. So I'm just gonna kind of walk you through quickly what I'm doing for my design, and know that this may help you for yours, and it may like spark some ideas, or at least show you a couple of techniques that you might be able to use for your own. I'm just gonna slowly start transforming this and kind of getting an idea of what I want this to look like. So now I've kind of squished it into this shape just by pinching the outside edges of my circle after I rounded it out. Now my idea is to have this be like the continuation of my handle, so I'm actually not going to have my handle reach all the way to the mug. I want it to look like it was coming out of the bottom of the spaceship. So my plan is to kind of have the handle coming up underneath the bottom here, and then for this to be what attaches to my mug. So I think I might kind of cut out an angle so that this part is resting on the top of my rim, and I'm going to have a 90-degree angle coming down so that I've got a corner that just rests nicely there. So I'm going to cut that out. So now I've scraped off the top. It's still pretty rough, but you can see it's not as much of a slope as what you see on the bottom. And then I carved out this little angle, and to do these things I used the loop tool to just scrape across this edge, and then I used the needle tool actually to just like slice in and then kind of smooth it out going that direction. So now my plan is to have this anchored onto my mug and to have the handle coming off, and I'm planning to make this sort of like a comfortable place to rest my thumb. So when I attach my handle, I want to like have my fingers just like naturally in this arrangement. To make my alien's face, it really did take a lot of smoothing and rolling this shape in my hands to make it as smooth as possible. As you can see, I still have a couple little cracks, so I'm just going through and continuously just spraying a small amount on my hand and then working some of those little dry bits away. And as I'm starting to think through the shape that I want for this alien's head, I think I'm going to actually use the help of a couple of different tools, and I wanted to show you how I was going to do that. So use this metal rib as well to kind of press up against that space to start making his little alien jawline. Now I'm also going to just chop this a little, and I'm gonna just sort of smooth that out in the back, kind of round that a bit so that you can see he's got kind of a front of his face, and that's like his jaw. So now I'm also going to use the help of the back of a paintbrush handle, and I'm gonna just work on adding in some indents for where his little eyes are gonna go. So I'm using just the back of a rounded handle paintbrush to just kind of push that in a little bit for his eye sockets. So I just worked to roll out this itty bitty little eye for him, and I'm going to just use this wire cutting tool to chop this in half so that it actually has a flat surface. Chop that. Whoop. Okay, now I'm gonna just get that to stay on by blending it into this shape. I'm just using the back of my fingernail and just kind of pushing down and then blending into it. Now that my handle has been sitting for a while and it's starting to stiffen up a bit, that's the perfect stage to go through and just spray your hands a little bit and work on smoothing out all of those little creases that might have occurred as you were bending it originally. So I'm just going to take my time and go through and first on the outside edges I'm gonna smooth, and then I'm gonna turn this the other direction and work on smoothing all of these little bumps and texture little bits that you might be able to see so that it's a perfectly smooth handle. So at this point, I have created my little spaceship. I've got my little alien guy sitting in there, and then I've attached the handle so that it is underneath the spaceship, so it looks like it's coming out from beneath. And then I've got this little angle. I don't know if you guys can see that, but that's where I'm actually going to attach it to my mug. So I just wanted to show you this in-between phase, and this has taken me a long time. Like, it's taken me a couple of hours to get this tiny spaceship all smoothed out and put back together. I dropped it once, it's been a fiasco, but this should take you quite a while if you're getting to the level of detail I expect for this handle. So I just wanted to show you my in-between phase before I attach it to my mug. So now I've gone through and scored and slipped both the top edge of my mug, the side where it's going to connect with the spaceship, and the base of my mug, in addition to the actual pieces, so the back of my spaceship and the bottom of my handle. Now I'm going to score and slip them together, so I'm going to wiggle and apply a lot of pressure to get them to stay. Now I've scored and slipped these guys together, and I'm going to use one of these little wire tools to just go through in the seam and blend them together. So I wanted to show you what that looks like when it's all the way blended. So I'm going to take this and just go up against that edge and push in until it looks like it's one cohesive piece. And I'm going to do that in every surrounding area where I connected it. So this is my mug with the handle on it. So I'm going to show you just how I attached it. So underneath, you can see that I went through and cleaned up that seam really nicely. I also went through and added a seam edge just right in the bottom of that handle. I still have a couple of things to clean up, but this is the general idea of what you guys are doing for your three-dimensional handle. So now that I've got this finished, I'm not going to wrap it up the same way that we normally wrap things up, because we want this to get to be close to leather hard. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to drape my bag over this, and I'm just going to kind of twist that around without actually closing up the bottom. And then I'm gonna put it away this way so that it can start to dry out. And because it's so thin, we really should still wrap it up a little bit, because it will dry out quickly on its own because it's such a thin wall. So we don't want this to get to bone dry, so we're gonna wrap this up still before we put it away. And there you go. The last step that you're going to complete for this video is to roll out a practice slab so that you'll have a chance to try out carving with the Sgraffito technique before you're actually working on your final mug. So we're going to roll this at 1/8 of an inch, use a 1/2 pound of clay, and then you're going to take a grill cleaner, clean it and smooth it the way that you did for your mug, just on the top so that you have a nice section to practice on. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this episode. I hope that you enjoyed learning how to create your slab mug with a three-dimensional detail on your handle. So let's go ahead and move on to the next episode. Thanks for watching.